Moving on, let's talk bees. Back in episode 83, I talked about how 7 bee species in Hawaii were recently added to the list of endangered species for the first time in history. And indeed, how important bees are for our survival, seeing as 1 of every 3 bites of food that we eat is thanks to pollinators, i.e., bees. Well, as is the cornerstone of this show, now that you know, what are you going to do about it? As it happens, Charlie Moore isn't just doing something about it, he's created a nationwide community where anyone can do something about it, even if you only have a small patio-sized garden. Take a look.
It really came down to post-World War II. After World War II, everything started changing to monoculture farms. So before that, it was all polyculture, meaning we were growing a lot of stuff. People were utilizing the honeybees to produce honey. And it was the only manageable pollinator that we knew of. So because of that, all of a sudden when we went to monoculture, they just kept using the honeybee as their primary pollinator. They didn't know of any other resource to use. They didn't even know about using the native pollinators. It was just if we had this one here and it was able to produce a byproduct of honey, which was also something that they can monetize on, it just made sense. So over the last 7 decades, really, it's always been a big emphasis. I mean, the honeybee industry alone is a multi-billion-dollar industry of pollination. Unfortunately, it's also very unethical. We're transporting these bees starting from the West Coast in a lot of the almond orchards, as an example. So now every time a honeybee lands on a flower there, it's picking up the native pathogens that are there, and it's also picking up the pesticides that are being sprayed on those plants. So then when those bees get picked up, and the almond orchards only bloom for a 14-day period. So after that 14 days, the honeybee keepers come back in, pick up those bees, transport them to another state. So now when those honeybees go to that other state, it's transporting the non-native pathogens now to the new flowers. And it's also transporting the pesticides that were used on another crop into another orchard. Unfortunately, by the time they get here to the East Coast, it's like a bomb went off, and it severely impacts the species of native pollinators. So from the research that we've been doing and the farms that we've been working with, we're showing that utilizing these specific hole nesting bees, a honeybee can travel up to 8 miles for food. Okay, typically about 2 miles if there's a good sustainable food source in the area, but they have a really large distance of travel. Hole nesting bees only have a 300-foot radius of travel, meaning that you can really keep them contained without spreading any non-native pathogens and such. And you're not moving these bees around. Once they're in the orchard, they're there. They're there doing their job, and they're going to be there throughout the entire season. The reason why they're better pollinators, nothing against the honeybee, by the way, but the honeybee is not a native bee to the United States, okay? The honeybee I call a pollen stripper, okay? Its role is to ensure the success and thrive of the hive, not the individual. So a lot of times the honeybees won't even travel to other trees because they go to that one tree, strip as much pollen off of it, wet stack the pollen, meaning that they're using their saliva to pack the pollen extremely tight on the pollen packs on its legs. So even if it does land on another tree, it may not drop pollen off because it's stuck on it. And then when it comes back, it drops the pollen off, and it keeps going back and forth collecting the pollen for the hive. A solitary bee is a very hairy bee. It doesn't have a pollen pack collector. It literally lands in a flower like a bomb. Think about a Mack truck blasting into a 2-ton thing of seeds. Okay, it's going to go everywhere. So when the mason bee lands inside of the flower, all of the pollen gets stuck to it. And then it's just going to go to the next flower, and then the next flower, and it's constantly dropping pollen, picking pollen up, until it gets so overloaded with pollen. Then it goes back to its hole, drops the pollen off, lays its cell. For the cell, when it turns into the cocoon, it has a food source in there. So it's really providing a future food source for the new bees, but it's indiscriminate about collecting pollen. It's going to go everywhere, where a honeybee is specifically told to go where it goes.
So talk about that because you mentioned that, the honeybees get transported across the entire country. And so they pick up pathogens here and there, they pick up pesticides here and there. So using the solitary bee, would that also help not only with bee die off, but also with the spread of pathogens?
Oh, big time, big time. Um, it's where do I start with this one? um, so what? First off, what we do is we farm our bees in every single state. So if if we're sending bees out to say an orchard in Ohio, they're getting bees from Ohio, so they're somewhat already acclimated to that area. So by doing this and keeping the native bees really within the food growing area, it's helping, especially with organic farms. It's reducing the impact of the spread of pathogens. It's increasing the population of the bees because as the bees become more acclimated to that specific microenvironment, genetically, they're just going to keep getting better and better and stronger to that environment and more successful, increasing the population of the native bees. The spring bees, the mason bees, about 20 to 30% will always disperse out from the hole and spread out, which is nice because now you're creating a micro radius zone to increase the population that is going to disperse out from that area. The summer bees, the leaf cutters, we see a 40 to 50% dispersal rate, meaning that they're going to go off and create new zones. So every year, these little zones are going to keep just getting bigger and bigger and expanding larger. And that's why we get the backyard gardener involved. While the backyard gardener raising their bees, by about year 2 or 3, when they first start raising them, they're going to start seeing an excess of cocoons that can be sufficient for their home. So, as an example, all right, like this house here, this is a spring bee nest, and this is a summer bee. The difference is the size of the holes: 8 millimeter, 6 millimeter. This house can house about 50 with this actual nesting, 50 spring bees and about 100 summer bees. Now, by about year 3, you might have 200 spring cocoons. Well, what do you do with those cocoons? Well, you can either increase the nesting inside of the house because you really like them. You could let them all out, and the excess will completely disperse, which is awesome because you're helping to significantly increase the radius now of the population because they will travel up to a half a mile for a new home. Or what we do is we call it the bee buyback. We buy back your excess because now you're giving us a population that we can work with that's specific and unique to that geographic environment that we could put back out into the orchards, making it more successful to the farmer to have a very acclimated pollinator that's very used to that microgeographic region to significantly increase the yields of food. I mean, some farms we're seeing over 400% increase of yield of food production just from these bees. And the ratio is much lesser as well. A honeybee is about we see about 60,000 bees per acre.
As we progress and as everything from climate change to pesticide use to all these things shift, do you see us needing to shift towards less of like a, oh, we only grow apples or we only grow spinach, to really embrace this sort of polyculture, as not just for our own sake but also for the bees?
Absolutely. I mean, what's so cool is that the societal trend is happening organically, which is really cool. People are becoming more and more aware and really concerning about what are we eating, you know? And farmers are feeling the impact of that, and they're going organic. But to go organic, you have to create biodiversity, and it really all stems in the soil. If your soil is chemically induced, you're not going to be able to grow things properly. So let's clean the soil, put the microbes back into the soil, the life, the organic matter that starts life. Allow cover crop, all right? Allow plants to bloom that are going to be blooming outer season of your actual crop plants, and plant other crops that are going to be blooming outside of that as well. And by doing that, you're creating more food overall throughout the season. Yes, it may be a little bit more work, but now you're providing something healthy. You're bringing the ecology balance back, and you're not spending so much money anymore on the chemical maintenance. When you start altering nature, which has been evolved over millions of years, you don't know what the long-term adverse effects are going to be for us. Okay, it may in the very short run do okay for us, but genetically, what are we changing in our system? You know, what are those? you know, hundreds and thousands and millions of year old immunities of these bacterias that our bodies have built up that we may be accidentally getting rid of. When there's a sign outside, when something gets sprayed and it says, don't walk on this for 24 hours, that's a problem. Like, that's a serious, serious. And why is that okay for society to accept? Why should things have to be labeled organic? You know, things should be labeled here, we grew this chemically.
So shifting more towards your site, the site is very much about getting people, not just raising awareness about this solitary bee, but also getting people to raise bees. So talk about this initiative. Whereas like a lot of people be like, oh, this is a site about bees, and here's help save the bees, and you get a tote bag. Like your initiative is much more like, no, you come, we will send you stuff, and you raise the bees yourself. Talk about that initiative.
Um, why? Why is it so important for people to raise bees? It's a matter of transforming their own backyard environments and starting with the bees as their first stepping stone towards building an organic lifestyle, really, what it comes down to, and sustainability. If your bees are dying, your land is unhealthy. And it's a clear inclination of that. Okay. If you walk outside on your lawn and you don't see any bugs crawling around, you have a problem. Bugs are supposed to be there. So when you start raising bees, all of a sudden it kickstarts the life of everything around it. It increases the health of the plants by pollinating more. You're getting more native species of other native flowers growing, creating biodiversity of flora, attracting the non manageable pollinators, butterflies, hoverflies, bumblebees. All of a sudden, grow a garden, grow food. You're going to be so happy growing food. And the level of gratification in this, it's wild. It's a very psychological piece too. You start seeing yourself removing your time away from, literally doing this, all day long, to being outside, getting your hands dirty, feeling good, breathing in the fresh air, looking around and exploring like, wow, I was able to create an ecologically balanced environment in my backyard. And your backyard now becomes, I don't even like to use the phrase backyard anymore. I call it your exterior living environment. And that's what it should be. It's your stress-free zone. Sit outside, leave your phone inside. All right, take your watch off and breathe and live at the pace of nature. At the end of the day, in a long-term goal, 20 years from now, if we get a big population to do this, the health of our environment is going to be so much greater.
For more on Charlie's site, Crown Bees, and indeed to get started with your own solitary bee project, visit crownbees.com.